Now, to take the idea of blending and unblending a step further, what I've done here is I've plugged a texture map into the unblend port. Well, let's take a look at the render tree here for a second. And if I look at the Seams tab under the host node, you'll notice that the unblend port is actually mappable. And what I've done here is I've brought in a texture map, I've created a texture projection, I'm pulling a channel out of that, and I'm using a scalar math node to multiply it and basically bring the texture map out of the normal 0 to 1 range that most textures fall into. And I'm basically just converting it to an integer with a scalar to integer node, and that in turn plugs into the host unblend group, which receives an integer for to create a discontinuity. So basically, just think of these flat areas of color as different integer values, and you'll notice here at the bottom I'm using black to kind of terminate the top and the straight ends of the letter R. So think of black as being kind of like a magic blending paint to disguise seams and so forth. Now, as soon as you start mapping textures into the unblend port of the Toon host node, you're going to start to notice fairly quickly that texture interpolation is kind of like your enemy. What I've got here on the left here is a texture that's been mapped using the standard texture image node lookup node. On the right, there's a different Toon node texture lookup that is made specifically to map into the unblend port, and there's a switch in this lookup node that allows you to toggle between interpolated and uninterpolated texture lookup. And the reason this is important is when you're converting the texture values into an integer, you kind of need relatively clean, straight values. This is actually like a really tiny texture map. It's maybe 15 or 20 pixels, and what I want to do is kind of take a look at what happens when you start feeding interpolated texture lookups into the unblend port. Alright, what I've got here is an inked example of the previous scene, where on the left I've got a grid which is mapped using the standard interpolated texture lookup node to texture image, and on the right I've got a grid mapped with the Toon node texture lookup node that has interpolation turned off. It's using nearest neighbor as opposed to interpolated lookups, and that in turn is plugged into the unblend port of the host node. So you can sort of see, I'm getting all sorts of weird roundness over there and undesirable lines showing up. And on the right, my own drawing errors of the Space Invaders aside, it's pretty clean and pretty square. So the way that you install the texture lookup node is you will need to enter these commands into either a shell or a bat file and execute them in a shell in which the XSI environment variables have already been set.